Right.
So, upon reflection, how do you feel our systems in general, no particular element needs to be focused on, it could just be overall, or any particular one you feel most drawn to, how do you think our systems perpetuate the whiteness that Dr. Rhamie referred to earlier?
I think I mentioned one that you talked about, Gifford, in terms of the psychological perception about the image of what we as Black people should look like. And I think sometimes there's a pressure, particularly on Black women, if you work in corporate Britain, you know, to straighten your hair. And I was giving the analogy earlier, you may have heard, with a contestant who was very successful on the X Factor some years ago, actually saying that she was told she wouldn't sell as many records. So it's not just the criminal justice system. It's not just health, where the disparities are just numerous in terms of getting treatment. There's also, you know, Asian women and issues around cardiac disease and getting access to appropriate healthcare. There's mental health that goes across the spectrum. I think there is a need to stop talking about it, but actually positively address the community needs. Yeah, I mean, I just think there's a need you can never have too much of a conversation, but it needs to be followed by action. Just like all those reports that started under Theresa May, you know, let's go and revisit the recommendations that have not been implemented. The David Lammy report, for example, there's been numerous others about Black people in the workplace. You know, I worry about Black graduates coming out with good degrees, and because of the pandemic, what are the job prospects going to look like? What is the longitudinal studies saying? On top of how difficult a challenge it is if we didn't have the pandemic. So those are the things that's across the spectrum.
I remember I actually used to do some, Judy, I don't know if you know this, but I actually used to do some diversity work with the police in Brams Hill.
Yes.
Yeah, I did it for a number of years.
Yeah.
And I remember upon my first outing there, I told them an experience that I had with being stopped by the police. I mean, every Black person virtually, especially if you're a Black male, has a story about being stopped by the police in London. And I was literally walking outside a Christian Union shop. I just bought some records. This would have been in the 80s. Christian books. Had my plastic bag, you know, with the Christian Union thing on, you know. And because of the sus laws at the time, you know, they were able to just stop us at a whim. And you know, this guy, and he was very this police officer crossed the room there, and he said, "Oh, you know, what have you taken from that shop?" So we all had. And I remember a friend telling me, because we used to call them Babylon, you know, we used to call the police. Sorry, Judy, because we used to serve. But we used to call the police Babylon.com, you know, or Babylon. And I have a friend who said, you know, the Bible said we should defund the police. I said, no, it doesn't. He said, yeah. If you look at the three angels' messages, it says Babylon is fallen. It's fallen. We need to do. Oh, dearie me. On a serious note, though, I work in education, as you know, and I think, you know, people are comfortable talking on the relational level. You know, there's unconscious bias here. You know, if we just correct terms, we would maintain more civil relationships and so on. But I actually think it's a lot more. Well, you've already mentioned that it has to be systemic. And if we're saying systemic, it means then that we've got to, based on what I've said earlier on, we've got to decolonize. And we've got to decolonize the curriculum. We've got to decolonize the academy. And thankfully, Newbold is on that pathway. I'm confident to say that we're seriously having conversations about this. And it's uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable, because if you've never been taught this before, and you've always been taught that your Eurocentrism, or implicitly that the Eurocentrism is really the truth, the way, and the life, all right? for somebody to actually turn around and say, well, wait a minute, the way you teach history of Western thought is very imperialistic. You cannot talk about history of the Western thought without talking about the power of colonialism and the power of imperial thinking, and how that literally saturates much of the historical evolution of Western civilization. Even the very thought of Western civilization, or claim, I should say, of Western civilization being predicated on Greco-Roman philosophy and Greco-Roman civilization is in itself problematic, because the Greeks predicated their civilization on the Egyptians. And it's clear for everyone to see. They changed the names of the gods. They had Pythagoras and others actually said, that they got their theorems from Egypt, and so on and so forth. And to write that out, we've got to write that out of history is what we have to deal with, because this is sheer ignorance. And this politics of ignorance, by politics of ignorance, I'm not talking about stupidity or idiocy, that's on one level. I'm talking about the very fact that the entire narrative that our educational system is built on literally excludes information about the older civilizations, about even the atrocities of the past 500 years. It excludes that, and it creates a politics of ignorance. And people are thinking, no, this is our heritage, when really they haven't got a clue. And I think much of our work today has to be about systemically interrogating structural systems that structure our lives, that structure the way we think. And when we do that, I think we will move some way forward in liberating society at large. And until it happens, we're still going to be, so to speak, enslaved by society.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we want to thank Dr. Gifford Rhamie and Judy with I think how you've perfectly summed up not only the wider history of race in Britain, and also how that directly affects in the individual encounters, which unfortunately way too many people of color, especially Black people, do face and do experience at the hands of these systems. And I think so what we're going to do now, based on what you've both just said, we're going to transition into the next part of our program, where we'll speak a bit more about how the wider systems impact us as Christians in our churches, in the different spaces which we are. So I would like to again thank Dr. Gifford Rhamie and Judy Clements so much.
Can I just say that as you do so, I hope they deal with the question of colonial Christianity, because there ought to be some defunding and scaling back there too. Okay.
We might have to do a separate podcast with you on that one.
I was going to say, we'll throw the question out there at least. So,